Good evening. This is Pamela, and you're listening to Watchmen on the Pod. All right, we're going to continue in our new book reading, Codeword Barbelon, Danger in the Vatican, The Sons of Laloya and Their Plans for World Domination. This is book one. The author is P.D. Stuart. We are in chapter 2. The Constitutions of the Jesuits. The ravens have ascended in the nest of the nightingales. Persian proverb. Time brings to light hidden evil. The cursed prophecy come true. I cannot discover, wrote the French famous lawyer La Cholotis, himself educated by the Jesuits, that the constitutions of the Jesuits have ever been seen or examined by any tribunal whatsoever, secular or ecclesiastic, by any sovereign, not even by the Court of Chancery of Prague, when permission was asked to print them. They have taken all sorts of precautions to keep them secret. The most well-known Jesuit motto is Ad Marium, Marium de Gloriam. This phrase, one Jesuit says, recurs some 259 times in the constitutions penned by Laloya. Another Jesuit, the biographer of Ignatius Laloya, Dominique Bohars, called the constitutions a revelation from God and an inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Thus, the constitutions came to be seen by the Jesuits as having absolute authority over every member of the order. This secret document is, in a manner of speaking, the mission statement of the Society of Jesus. But now, reader, suppose we were to ask them to see these constitutions, to look inside. They will not produce it. In Regulae Societas Jesu, Volume 2, 1827, paragraph 26, we read, "No one can tell to persons outside what is done or to be done in the house, the navate. Nobody can show them the constitutions or other documents of that kind, or any other written material about the rules or privileges of the society without permission by the superior. Thankfully, we know what it contains, and what principles do we find therein? What godly virtues do they contain? Dear reader, of this monstrosity of the Jesuits, none should be ignorant. It was aptly described by the French Parliament as a collection of dangerous and pernicious teachings and precepts taught by the Jesuits with the approbation of their superiors and of every pope since 1540. The constitutions provide for a highly centralized form of authority with life tenure for the head of the order, who the Jesuits call the Great Eminence or the Black Pope. Hence the Jesuits are referred to as the Black Militia, for reasons that will soon become apparent. The constitutions places particular emphasis on the virtues of obedience to superiors and special obedience to the Pope. One of its cardinal motto given by Ignatius is Paradine esse cadaver esset, to have no mind of one's own, but to be like a dead body, in the service of the general or Black Pope. William Russell writes, the Jesuits are as chosen soldiers of the Pope under the command of a general. This general, or head of the order, was invested with despotic authority over its members. And he adds, they are required by the constitutions and the Secreta Monita to attend to the transactions of the great of the world, to study the dispositions of persons in power, and to cultivate their friendship. Like the Monita, the constitutions require every Jesuit to regard the interest of the order as his principal object, to which all other considerations were to be sacrificed, as it was for the honor and advantage of the society, i.e., the order, that its members should possess an ascendant over persons of rank and power. James Broderick comments, in the constitutions of his order, St. Ignatius laid it down that each of his sons ought to have a keen eye for the unconsidered trifles of life. The constitutions gave the general immense power. The French lawyer La Chalotais gives us insight into the ultra-fascist nature of the Society of Jesus and the power of its general. The general of the Jesuit order is invested with control over every aspect of the government and regulation of the colleges of the society. From his orders there is no appeal. Not even the Pope himself can rescind the general's interdict. Not only is he able to release from vows, he is also empowered to examine by every means into the consciences of the members of society. In short, the general is the society. To ensure utmost secrecy, the constitutions of the Sons of Loyola direct that the provincials and superiors shall write to the society's general in cipher, such precautions being taken against enemies, says the French lawyer M. de la Chotelius. I'm sure I am just butchering that poor man's name. Who are their enemies, and why the need to write in cipher? Before sketching an outline, which is all that space would allow, of how the constitutions came to be discovered by their enemies, it is instructive to read the words of an impartial commentator. Referring to these sons of Ignatius Loyola, Professor S. F. B. Morse wrote, and who are these agents? They are the Jesuits, an ecclesiastical order, proverbial through the world for cunning, duplicity, and total want of moral principle. An order so skilled in all the arts of deception that even in Catholic countries, in Italy itself, it became intolerable. Why did the Professor Morse, famous inventor of Morse code and a close friend of President Lincoln, speak so balefully of the Jesuits? To answer this question, we must return to the cause of Father La Valette's undoing, the aforementioned French lawsuit against the Jesuits. As stated earlier, Jesuit Father Pierre-Antoine La Valette had borrowed heavily from businessmen in France, but his ambitious commercial venture failed at sea. Being unable to pay the debt he had incurred, La Valette's creditors sued him and the Jesuit order in the French courts and won. Their victory, some would say, was an act of God, dignitas Dei, in that the wide-ranging geopolitical plans of the Society of Jesus were, for the first time, brought before the eyes of men. Now the world had some light and proof of the true purpose of this great secret society. All of France was stunned. The reputation of the society was left in tatters, destroyed. The Jesuits were brought to disgrace and lost their case. But watch closely how this drama unfolded. Having lost the argument in the provincial court in Paris, in the Paris lawsuit of 1760, the lawyers for the Society of Jesus appealed to the French Parliament. After much argument back and forth, the Jesuits, having made several pleas, all of which they were later forced to abandon as hopeless, they prayed in aid on one final desperate defense, that the order could not be held liable for La Valette's actions, as he was a renegade, because according to the defense, all Jesuits were positively prohibited from engaging in commercial ventures. In this, they committed a serious blunder. They made reference to their constitutions as the source of this prohibition. Not only was this defense a desperate one, It was later proved a most flagrant fraud. In fact, quite soon after their formation in 1540, the Jesuits had obtained a special license from the court of Rome under Paul III to trade with the nations which they labored to convert. Moreover, it was well known that Jesuits would trade on credit and profess to give the property of the society as security for commercial debts. In many instances, their methods of business were most abnormal. Treaties and rules of commerce obeyed by all other merchants, the Jesuits totally disregarded. Returning to La Valette's trial, in seeking to use their constitutions as a shield, the Jesuits exposed their Achilles heel. The French court demanded to see the said constitutions, upon which the Jesuits sought to make their defense against the lawful claims of La Valette's creditors. This created an impasse, as the Jesuits refused to disclose the constitutions, and as a result, the financial scandal almost brought many in France to bankruptcy. The French Parliament, to whom they had appealed, ordered the documents, the constitutions, to be produced. Until then, the Jesuits had kept them secret, even from many of their own members. The Jesuits, being a secret society, did not publish their rules. The Jesuit father, Montigny, was the poor soul to whom the society gave the unpalatable task of delivering the 2 volumes of their constitutions, 1757 edition, into the hands of the royal prosecutor general for the Parliament, the celebrated lawyer M. de la Chatolis. The renowned Dr. William Robertson says, it was a fundamental maxim with the Jesuits from their first institution not to publish the rules of their order. These they kept concealed as an impenetrable mystery. They never communicated them to strangers, nor even to the greater part of their own members. They even refused to produce them when required by courts of justice. The constitutions were preserved only in handwritten manuscripts and allowed only to a few select members of the society, and when the 2 volumes finally were printed, they were not for the public. Griesinger tells us that, besides the society itself, no one, with the exception of the Pope, was made acquainted, and still less did mankind in general know how the original statutes, the constitutions, and rules of the order had been further added to by the latter generals, lest on this account the world should be thrown into a severe panic by becoming acquainted with the contents of their constitutions, rules, and principles. And so, but for La Valette's blunder, as Providence would have it, the world may never have known of its existence. At this point, I beg leave to remind the reader that every one of the statements that follow in quotation marks are extracted from authenticated manuscripts, many taken from the writings of the Jesuits themselves, and which were all verified and collated by the commissioners and lawyers of the French Parliament. Having been forced to produce the documents, the constitutions were laid before Parliament on April 16, 1761. Quote, the result, we are told, was disastrous for the Jesuits, unquote. They lost their case and became much more odious than before. For the first time, the world saw the Jesuits through their own eyes, as revealed in the constitutions. And what a revelation it was. The disclosure revealed Jesuitism to men as an organization based on the most iniquitous maxims and armed with the most terrible weapons for the accomplishment of their object, complete and utter world domination. How quickly, observed Griesinger, they made haste to destroy by fire all copies of the same as far as it was possible to get a hold of them. But they soon became convinced, to their own most profound grief, that they had been too late with all these measures. The statements and teachings of the Jesuits, as extracted from their own constitutions, were collected and presented to the King of France in a document entitled Arrest du Parlement de Vatican, I don't know, due 23 December 1761 and May 1762. It charged the Jesuits with holding to a doctrine authorizing theft, lying, perjury, impurity, every passion and crime, teaching homicide, parricide, regicide, overthrowing religion in order to substitute for it superstition by favoring sorcery, blasphemy, irreligion, and idolatry. The above quote, taken from Isis Unveiled, corresponds exactly with the extracts from a work which appeared in Paris in 1762, known as Extraits des Assertions des Jesuits. These assertions were published by order of the French Parliament, and the facts, I am informed, can be independently verified by a visit to the British Museum and the Barbelon Library. 2 editions of the Extract des Assertions were published by P.G. Simon in Paris in 1762 in 4 volumes. The title page of the work states that it is a collection of dangerous and pernicious teachings and precepts taught by the Jesuits with the approbation of their superiors. The government lawyers who examined the documents, the Brinton La Chatoles in particular, discovered in the constitutions a handbook of every known form of heresy, idolatry, and superstition. Hold on 1 minute. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. It provides, he said, tutelage in suicide, legislate, the destruction of laws, and every kind of impurity, usury, sorcery, murder, cruelty, hatred, vendetta, insurrection, and treason. Thus were the Jesuits confounded, tanta nub testium, by such a cloud of witnesses. Their own constitutions without any need to rely on the secreta monita. And yet, dear reader, the Jesuits say that the constitutions are an inspiration of the Holy Spirit. How ironic that it was Jesus, after whom the Jesuit order named itself, who said, "There is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known." And it is even more ironic that it was the discovery of their constitution which was the principal grounds for the decree ordering the suppression of the Jesuit order in France in 1762, as a society most diabolical and dangerous. The findings, I gotta see what time it is because I don't want to go over. The findings in the constitutions led the well-known authority, Charles W. Heckthorn, to state of the alleged forged secreta monita. Even if these monita were not drawn up by a Jesuit, they yet fully exhibit the actual principles on which, as we know from history, the society has always acted, and that every kind of deception, assassination, regicide, poisoning, seduction, unnatural crimes, spoliation, perjury, have ever been practiced and approved by them, whenever their doing so could promote their own ends. For they gave an accurate picture of Jesuit ideas. All of the principles and instructions given in the Monita are to be found in the constitutions. Kind reader, if from a sense of misguided loyalty to the organization to which this order belongs, you are wont to regard these men as acting contrary to the principles of their religion, the Holy Catholic Church, then I remind you that these very constitutions were approved by Pope Paul III on September 27th, 1540, after his careful consideration, and have been approved by every pope since. Thus, the Jesuits act vicariously to the popes. In the constitutions, we find the Jesuits teaching and inciting, among other things, high treason, regicide, killing of the king, parricide, murder of a close relative. Such acts are not only acceptable, but also positively commended by the constitutions for the furtherance of the aims of the order and the interest of the Pope. And no marvel, for the Jesuit educator Emmanuel Sa writes, quote, "The rebellion of an ecclesiastic against the king is not a crime of high treason because he is not subject to the king," unquote. The Jesuits have even written books on the subject of the right to murder the king and anyone else for that matter. In one such book, authorized by the Jesuit Jacques Keller and printed in 1611, there is a chapter under the heading Tyrannicidem. The Jesuit Juan de Mariana published an earlier book called The King and the Education of the King in 1599, in which he advocated and defended tyrannicide. The constitutions further revealed that in order to fulfill the society's mission, the members of the order could create philosophies of left and right so that the world would be divided into opposing factions. Needless to say, as a result of these discoveries, i.e., those uncovered in the constitutions, the Jesuit order was dissolved in 1762, and finally in 1764, the Sons of Loyola were driven out of France, mainly because of their attachments to the bloody doctrines of regicide and the obstinate refusal to modify their constitutions. We shall learn much more on that later. In defense of the Jesuits. To be fair to the Jesuits, they did make a reply to the above charges entitled Response aux Assertions, attempting to discredit the facts collected by the commissioners of the French Parliament. It described the greater part of the commissioners' report as malicious fabrications, but the Jesuits' reply was feeble and ineffectual. Moreover, Henry Hadley Norris, the author of the Principles of the Jesuits, assures us that the charges of the French Parliament against the Jesuits were independently verified. He writes, quote, "To ascertain the validity of this, the said impeachment, the libraries of the two universities of the British Museum and of Sion College have been searched for the authors cited, and in every instance where the volume was found, the correctness of the citation established," unquote. In the end, after a thorough investigation, the French Parliament gave a most thunderous denunciation of the Jesuit order. Quote, "The aforementioned institute, the Jesuits, tending to introduce into the Church and the States under the specious veil of a religious institute, is not an order which aspires truly and only to evangelic perfection, but rather a body politic whose gasoline consists in a continual activity to arrive by all kinds of ways, direct or indirect, death, i.e. secret or public, the usurpation of any authority, to form a widespread immense body in all the states without really forming part of it, can exert its empire on the men of any state and of any dignity, so that it gets members in the various nations, and by its constitutions has the execution of the plan that the aforementioned company had proposed, to acquire immense riches while preparing in the shade, by veiling nevertheless its attentions, adopting for its doctrines the fatal teaching which makes it possible to calumniate, to persecute, and to even kill. In any state where it would be introduced, by its consequent control with its constitutions, tends to undermine little by little any legitimate authority, any administration, and to destroy the bond of all the parts of the body politic. All the more alarming that the laws of the aforesaid institute are a true fanaticism, reduced to a theory, so dangerous a company nothing could stop since this time the course of the doctrines regicide," unquote. Wow. And what is their ultimate objective in all this intrigue? What is the grand ambition, their avowed aim? Total world domination at any cost and by any means. So says Fyodor Dostoevsky in an exquisitely written passage from his book, The Brothers Karamazov. Quote, "Those are the worst of the Catholics, the Inquisitors, the Jesuits. They are simply the Romish army for the earthly sovereignty of the world in the future, with the Pontiff of Rome for emperor. That's their ideal. Something like a universal serfdom with them as master. That's all they stand for. They don't even believe in God, perhaps." Unquote. That is to say, if Dostoevsky is right, the total destruction of democratic society and its laws, upon the ruins of which they would plant their ultramontane ideals. Historian James A. Wiley explains the Jesuit enterprise from another perspective. Quote, "Of the craft of the Jesuits, the arts they employed, the disguises they wore, the seditions they sowed, the snares they laid for the life of the sovereign, and the plots they concocted for the overthrow of the Protestant Church, we shall have much opportunity to speak when we come to narrate the history of the Protestantism in Great Britain." Unquote. In particular, we shall look at the scheme to destroy in one fell swoop the entire monarchy and the Parliament and the most senior judges of England. It was such diabolical schemes that further prompted Wiley to say, quote, "What a harvest of plots, tumults, seditions, revolutions, torturings, reaped from the seed sown by the Jesuits." Unquote. And as if that was not enough, he adds grimly, quote, "Nor can we be sure that we have seen the last and greatest of their crimes." Unquote. These are indeed grave assertions, which we will seek to verify using only the best evidence, for it is an axiom that an historian must have sources, and he who asserts must prove. In this task we shall leave no stone unturned. As the Jesuit professors at Rome say, it is better to overkill than to leave half dead. Wow. Nor will we waste a single arrow from our quiver. Our words, we hope, shall fly like arrows to their targets, and we shall, where necessary, volley with a multitude of proofs in support. The evidence, we hope, will prove conclusive to dissolve your doubts. I assure you, however, dear reader, that we shall seek to use only lawful means in this effort. Nevertheless, you would agree that weapon must match weapon, and wit must match wit, for it is useless to use a walking stick against a bayonet, or a crossbow against a rifle. We shall use the hammer of reason to batter the stronghold of iniquity, and we shall pull hard at a few loose strings in the cloak of deception, which, when pulled long enough, unravels the entire fabric, revealing the mystery of iniquity within the papal church. When all is done, we shall see, too, that the moral theology of the Jesuits infects all of the secret societies, and that it produces in them all manner of corruptions. In so doing, it is my hope people will be stirred and society aroused to the danger that is fast bearing down upon us, threatening to crush democracy and plant religious fascism upon its ruin. The Jesuits, we shall prove, control the vertical, the horizontal, and almost everything in between. Indeed, for some time now, the Jesuits have been in possession of banking corporations, oil refineries, sugar and other farm operations, mineral mining corporations, and all kinds of commercial operations, bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, even millions. The Jesuit order can finance any political candidate in millions of US dollars if necessary. The order also owns several multi-million-dollar companies, including the Bank of America, Lockheed Martin Aviation Corp. Bank of America was founded in 1904 by an Italian immigrant and staunch Roman Catholic. It was initially called the Bank of Italy, but was renamed the Bank of America in 1928. Its founder, Amito Peter Gianni, A.P. Gianni, was acting as an agent for the Jesuit order, a fact, according to the United States Congress House Committee, that has never been denied by the Jesuit fathers. Today, the Jesuit order owns 51% of stock in the Bank of America. See German magazine Der Spiegel, August 13, 1958. Der Spiegel is one of Germany's most respected magazines and is Germany's magazine of record. Interestingly, A.P. Gianni was later appointed regent at the Jesuit-run University of California, Berkeley. Nor are we surprised to learn that Martin Delaney, a Chicago native and Jesuit-educated Catholic who studied for the priesthood, is now writing training programs for Bank of America. Bank of America is the creator of the Visa card system in 1977. It could well be called the Jesuit Bank of America. Der Spiegel also says that the Jesuits own controlling stocks in Phillips Petroleum. The Jesuits have extensive financial influence in TV and radio, too, as well as in the print media. These are but a few of the tentacles of the Jesuit Hydra in America. These enterprises they own and run not in the corporate name of the Society of Jesus, but under various agencies of crypto Jesuits, whose allegiance is to the order and who work under the aegis of the Jesuits. In fact, says one learned author, quote, the Jesuit property holdings are so boundless that they are measured by square miles and by degrees of latitude and longitude, rather than by acres or hectares. So much for their vows of poverty. And we shall see, too, that throughout their long history, the Jesuits meddled in politics and, quote, they used the sacrament of confession to penetrate the designs of princes, leaders, and statesmen, and to manipulate consciences to their own purposes, unquote. They even jobbed Bill Clinton into office, who said of his Jesuit mentor, quote, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call by a professor named Carol Quigley, unquote. As the former Italian Catholic scholar Paolo Sarpi said in his letters, quote, whenever and wheresoever the Roman Catholic Church has been in the ascendant, it has been a political institution, and whenever and wheresoever it ceases to be a political power in the land, it instantly becomes a political conspiracy, unquote. Now, I am fully aware that these assertions and the discussions which follow may well surprise, if not shock you. There are those who will no doubt laugh at and pooh-pooh these things. They will smile and say that this is no more than an enthusiastic working up of the imagination, mere conspiracy theories, by which to allure and tickle weak minds. And so, upon the very subjects indicated in the above-mentioned connections, I now offer details, for I know the state of minds today, and it does not enter into my plan to ignore any theme, any fact, which might persuade the doubter or convince the skeptic. In the coming pages, we shall offer ready solvents for your incredulities by means of copious amounts of proofs, a superabundance of the best evidence. But first, let us consider an event that transpired in the fall of 1605. And that will be next time. That's chapter 3, and it is the Gunpowder Plot, Guy Fawkes and his friends. All right, brothers and sisters. That concludes our reading for this evening. Keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters, and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us, you and I, embed the Word of God upon the very tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin